the Zoning Board of Appeals public hearing Thursday, February 14th, 2023. I have a motion to open the meeting. Can I have a second?
Second.
And then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we have in attendance board members Susan Stevenson, Luke Ferrin, and Julia McCormick via Zoom. And Joyce Jiffer is absent. We have Alex Wallach as our village planner in attendance, as well as Jeffrey Blinkoff, our legal counsel, and Chick Voorhees, our environmental consultant. We'll start off with one pending decision, which is case number 3132, Lee Kruder, 370 Great Plains Road. We are ready with a decision. So, Chick, do you want to speak with respect to the wetlands permit?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So this is a project that we worked quite a bit on over a number of months and a number of meetings. It's an existing house on a lagoon that had a prior decision some years ago. I think it was 2000. And there was a buffer that had been required that came to light through the permit review. That has been accommodated and actually improved on the proposed site plan that the applicant has prepared. So again, just by way of background, we had a number of meetings. The house that is currently on the property is being demolished. It's being moved farther from the wetlands. Originally, the applicant was meeting the front yard setback, but the zoning board and in Chapter 116 looks to weigh and balance setbacks from the road and setbacks from wetlands, and often looks to favor protection of wetlands due to the unique environmental resources of the village of Southampton. And so that was the case here, where the applicant sought relief of the front yard setback to further increase the setback from wetlands, to provide a 50-foot buffer from the wetlands, to provide a setback and protected area that's going to be restored with vegetation on the east side of the property, north of the wetlands, that actually increases the buffering on the subject property. That particular area in prior permits was just specified to remain unmaintained, but the current application has an extensive revegetation plan of that 50-foot wide natural landscape buffer on the east side of the property, in addition to a 14,734 square foot buffer from the wetlands. So, as I said, a lot of work went into this, a lot of considerations. At this time, you have a draft permit in front of you that references 370 Great Plains Road, case number 3132, dated today. It does have the more detailed project description that's consistent with what is being sought at present. The seeker classification as a type 2 action, consistent with Part 617, and reasons supporting the permit, which are spelled out. And so the first one has to do with the buffers that I mentioned, totaling over 20,000 square feet and with extensive revegetation to improve habitat and biological uptake and all the benefits that wetlands buffers provide. The property has been developed since 1978. As I said, the building is being removed and moved farther back from the wetlands. Number 3 has a table that was provided by the applicant that we've checked, and it basically states the existing condition as compared to the proposed condition, and in every case, the currently proposed setbacks are improved based on the proposed project. This will also include an IA system, or an innovative alternative on-site wastewater treatment system, that will reduce nitrogen load and effectively treat nitrogen wastewater. This project will also include downspouts and subsurface leaching for stormwater drainage, And in this case, because the area of disturbance is greater than an acre, there's a SWIP, or a stormwater pollution prevention plan, required by the building department that has been submitted and is either reviewed or under reviewed, but will be checked for conformance with New York State stormwater design guidance and village SWIP requirements. So we believe that this application does meet the standards for issuance of a permit. We've referenced the plans that are applicable here, and some of the standard conditions. Now, one thing that I did want to point out, I don't have a condition currently for the covenant, but the applicant had offered a covenant, and Mr. Blinkoff and I worked on a covenant to establish the buffer. So we have a draft of that is part of the decision. I think probably the most appropriate thing to do would be to add reference to that covenant that will be signed and filed. But as I said, Mr. Blinkoff and I had worked on that together. So that is pending before you, and if you have any questions, I'm here to help try and answer them.
And the covenant's referenced in the decision for the variance.
Should the board wish to proceed with that? Just to clarify, so the other piece to this application was the dimensional requests for variances. The applicant was seeking dimensional relief in order to have a single-family dwelling at a setback of 61.5 feet where 80 is required, and was also seeking to decrease the required west side yard setback from 30 feet to 13.5 feet for the purposes of a pergola. Some of the considerations for the board's consideration as they move forward through the hearing was that with respect to the main structure, as Mr. Voorhees had pointed out, the board on the record had noted that it would have little detriment to the surrounding community given the location at which it was being proposed, and in fact would be adding an additional benefit by being moved further back. So the board, I think, was taking that into account. There were questions and concerns, however, that had come up as to the pergola, and just to give some sense of it, that the pergola and its proposed location, when we look at the criteria that one looks at for a variance, one of them is the substantial nature of the request. This would be almost a 50% request based on what's in the record and what the board had considered, and that the board had discussed, and I think if one looks at the drawings and the plans submitted, that the board weighs the benefits sought by the applicant as against any detriment, and presumably the benefit sought here is to increase the enjoyment of the pool area, and one of the issues was whether or not that can be met by existing conditions. So based on what had been discussed on the record, I have prepared a draft decision for the board's consideration, and based also on my discussions with Mr. Voorhees and also with representatives of the applicant, I had prepared a draft covenant for the board's use. Should the board proceed with that, I would recommend, and this would be up to the board, but I would recommend that it be referenced, the covenant be referenced in the decision, and that the covenant also and the decision both note that the covenant would need to be recorded by the applicant, fees paid by the applicant, and that no building permit for the project will be issued until there's proof of those steps having been taken. And I think that's one of the things that Mr. Voorhees had indicated that he wished to be sure would take place. And this, I think, is for fairness to everybody, applicant, anybody who buys the property later, and for any building department officials or any boards. There was a question that was raised as to whether or not, if there's not a covenant on file, people may not see that there's a condition. So this is to address that which was raised on the record. So sorry to speak beyond the question that was asked.
I think we'll do this in 2 votes. The first vote will be to approve the wetlands special permit. Then we'll vote for the approving the decision as you wrote it. Can we, when we vote on the wetland special permit, vote but require the additional condition that you have in your decision with respect to the variances, just to add that condition to the wetlands
To the wetlands permit? Sure, I think Mr. Voorhees had mentioned that. So this would be, it's a draft for a reason, and if the board wants to add language, just to make sure that all 3 documents make reference to the covenant obviously speaks of itself, The decision will make reference to the covenant, and Mr. Voorhees raised it tonight, so that would just be, perhaps if the board is to approve it subject to adding language that says that this is to reference the covenant by
Okay.
incorporation.
Okay, so I'll motion to accept the wetland special permit, subject to the addition of the covenant with respect to the buffer being implemented, and that covenant to be recorded. So can I have a second to approve at this stage the wetland special permit in connection with case number 3132, 370 Great Plains Road?
Second.
Second, and all in favor of approving the wetland special permit for 370 Great Plains Road, case number 3132, say aye.
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 And Julia. So now we can move on to the decision with respect to the variances.
Is there a way to see Julia better? She's like part of our board.
Can we make?
Thank you. You.
Okay, so we'll, I will motion in this instance to approve the decision as written by legal counsel, granting the variances for the single-family dwelling to be located 61.5 feet from the front yard, where 80 feet is required, but denying the variance for the pergola. The request was to locate the pergola 13.5 feet, where 30 feet was required. Can I have a second to approve the decision as written by legal counsel in case number 3132?
Second.
And then all in favor?
Aye.
You're gonna
I
speak to it?
yeah, I think we should. I certainly the house, and I think we should approve the pergola as well. This isn't a case of two properties right up against each other. There's a wide driveway in between. I understand the neighbor complained, but I think that the pergola is far enough away from his actual property that it doesn't really impact his own enjoyment of his property.
We just voted, didn't we?
Yeah, no, he's just voting.
Just saying how
he
I
would
feel.
have-
Okay, just.
He would have approved the pergola.
I would have approved the pergola. I thought we could vote on each. You're a no on the pergola as well?
That's correct.
Okay.
There's 3 votes against the pergola, but you're, just to be clear, you're in favor of the house?
Yes.
Okay, we set with that?
Yes,
Did we
so
vote on
it's
that?
granted in part and denied in part.
We can change that. Fine, no problem. I'll
This is
sign it
free
up.
as enough to.
Hmm?
Right, it's granted in part and denied in part.
Denied in part with respect to, well, no, yeah, right, denied in part with respect to the pergola. Okay, moving on. We don't have to do anything, I do not believe, but Jeffrey, correct me if it's not true. We had already approved the adjournment in case number 3144, 1377 Meadow Lane, so we don't have to do anything
That's correct.
tonight,
So that's it on 370 Great Plains?
and
Yes.
that is it.
Yeah.
Can we have a copy of it?
Of course,
Sure. If I can steal back the
Yes.
extra copy I gave you?
yes.
And Chick, if there's an addition that needs to be made to the wetlands permit, if you could send that to us, we can have it prepared for the chairman's signature.
Need
Yes.
my copy?
We'll do, Alex.
What I'll suggest is we'll get
All right, thank
more
you.
copies, because we're gonna have to change the,
Okay.
and the covenant as well, Mr. Chairman.
And this,
Let me give these to you now, and we'll get you conform copies.
Perfect. And do we have a copy of the wetlands permit as well?
There's this. Mr. Voorhees, do you have an
I
extra?
do not know.
Let me see if I do.
Unprepared, what?
Melissa, we also have to get these filed by the clerk, so we'll get you official copies.
You're no on that pergola too, huh? You're no on that pergola?
no on the pergola too. It was close, don't get me, you know.
Okay.
With respect to 71 Hill Street, have we approved their adjournment at the last meeting, Jeffrey, or why don't we do that
You
anyway?
did, Chairman.
We did
I
it
think you
last
did
meeting?
actually, to put it to March 14th.
Yes.
Yes.
That was done at the last meeting.
So we're ready for case number 3153, Smithtown Partners, 40 Meadow Lane.
Good evening, everyone. For the applicant, Michael Simlensky, 860 Montauk Highway, Watermill, New York. For the applicant, Smithtown Partners, happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Yeah.
Hopefully your Valentines are as understanding as my girlfriend is. She told me this morning it was always on her bucket list to spend Valentine's Day with the ZBA. So in light of the holiday, I'll try to make my presentation as brief as possible. At the board's request, we've submitted an affidavit of Ed Armas, a New York State licensed engineer, calculating the gross floor area of the structure. Mr. Armas measured the property on February 8th, 2023, and found it to be in compliance with 116-17.1 of the village code. The total gross floor area as found by Mr. Armas was 5,841 square feet, which is less than the code mandated maximum GFA for the property of 6406.7. Additionally, we've provided to the record the relevant decisions regarding the determination of the half-story and the fact that it is in fact a half-story. This matter was determined, appealed, determined, again, litigated, and then appealed, and finally decided in favor of it being a half-story. After this litigation history, an original certificate of occupancy was issued, and then before my client purchased the property, an additional updated certificate of occupancy was issued, all finding the building was a half-story. So does the board have any questions as it relates to the GFA or the half-story pieces?
Well, I do with respect to the GFA, because your application states that the size of the property is 40,055 square feet.
My understanding, I believe, is it's supposed to be 49,067 is the original GFA for our calculation. That number, as you know, changes as it relates to as it relates to the time and the tide, and because it goes to mean high water. So the number from the building department is 49,067, which you take 10% of and add 1,500 to come to 6406.7.
But the letter of denial from the building department said that the size of the property is 40,055 square feet.
I can clarify that, but the GFA calculation as it relates to this when the COs were issued is 6406.7, based upon a FAR of 49,067.
Is there a survey that says that?
I can provide one in the record. I don't have one here with this as part of the packet, but I can provide one for that.
Cool.
No.
Well, which is it? That's 9,000? That doesn't make sense to me.
No, not without a survey, and we're also operating on the basis of a building department letter of denial and an application which says it's 40,000, but we'll
Okay,
iron that out.
Fine. I see it.
Do any board members have any other questions?
Just an updated survey, I guess.
Okay, we can
to
provide an
clarify
updated survey for that 49,067 number.
Yeah. It might be worth having the surveyor go out now and get, the most
Right, we
recent.
can try to accomplish that.
Yeah.
But as you know, it changes in relation to because it goes to
Yeah, it can change over time with the tide line. I understand.
The other question I would have is, just to elaborate a little bit on point number 13, where Mr. Armas states that the lowest level of the structure is a cellar.
Correct. That's so it is deemed a cellar because it is below grade, below finished grade. Any pursuant to 116.17.1 of the code, a cellar is defined as anything that's any living space that's any level of the space that's below finished grade, and the entire lower level is below finished grade, and therefore does not count towards GFA.
Finished grade or naturally occurring grade?
No, it's actually finished grade.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that for properties where the flood level was an issue, the normal definition of cellar didn't really apply, and there's that lower level was more as a flow through for any flood waters.
It's still defined as a cellar pursuant to the code.
Okay.
Because it's below finished grade. And the walls are designed breakaway walls
Right.
in this premises, but it's still defined as a cellar pursuant to the code.
Got it.
And does not count towards GFA.
Yep.
Alex, do you want to weigh in a little bit on that? Because I understand the applicant's position is that it's a cellar, and it may very well be, but I'd still prefer to hear from the building department that that's confirmed.
Yeah, I believe that that's right. The way that the building inspector determines a GFA, anything that's a more than half underground, which I believe this is based on the site plan, is cellar and doesn't count towards GFA. And also, Luke, to your point, things that are beneath the base flood elevation and the flood level are not counted towards GFA. That's can only be used as garage and storage, and it's like a flow-through space.
So they wouldn't have been allowed to put a ground floor there if they had wanted to.
Correct.
Yeah.
They're allowed to have the garage that is there. There's a CO garage there, and that is allowed pursuant to the FEMA regulations based upon the base flood elevations, which we all know are kind of ridiculous because they're for a flood insurance program where the maximum payout is $250,000, which in a large part of the country makes sense, but in this corner of the world maybe doesn't. But that being said, if there's no other questions as to that, I just wanted to run through the 5 factors again.
Sure.
And then we can leave the record open for us to submit the survey and the square footage calculation, if that's okay with the board. So when we're talking about the 5-part test that relates to this application, the first test is whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by the granting of the area variance. So here we have the village ARB has found a larger scale version of this project to be consistent and appropriate within the historic district. And also the record, we've submitted to the record letters of support from the immediately adjacent neighbors to both the east and the west. You know, these 2 letters, also have some added significance in the matter as it's those 2 very neighbors that, when I was talking about the litigation history before, were involved in litigation in regards to this, and now they're supportive of the current application that's before the board. So the second test is whether the benefit sought for the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than an area variance. I really wanted to remark on this, as there's been some soliloquy amongst the board whereby the board suggested it was possible to do an interior elevator. Our architects even admitted the same. However, the test is not one of being possible, it's whether it's feasible to the applicant. I would first draw your attention to the case of Baker v. Brownlee. This case talks about feasibility to the applicant should be applied to alternative location analysis. The case stands for the premise that any alternative location is not a true alternative if it doesn't achieve the actual benefit sought. There it was a patio that was designed to be on the water side, and the ZBA in that case said, no, you can put the patio on the other side of the house. And the court said, no, that is not a feasible alternative to the applicant. And it's not a feasible alternative to the applicant because, in that case, it was because of the views. Here, the alternative doesn't achieve the benefits of the applicant in that the interior elevator is not feasible to the applicant because, A, it would cost $1.3 million more to construct, but more importantly and more significantly than the cost difference is the interior elevator site would require the mobility impaired to traverse halfway around the house from the parking court in order to get there. The option proposed makes the elevator significantly more accessible and thus is the feasible option to the applicant, not just a possible one. Additionally, in determining feasible to the applicant, significant zoning treatises have supported consideration of financial feasibility and compatibility with architectural scheme. Professor Pat Salkin's New York Zoning and Law Practice states, other considerations when evaluating this factor may include the economic infeasibility of compliance with the applicable regulations and the desire to respect aesthetic and architectural features. It is respectfully submitted, we have both of those here in this location. In addition to that, we've talked about the architectural features and how much it would disrupt the architecture of the home to have an interior elevator located as where it was suggested by the board. In addition to this, the Tanglewood
Excuse
case.
me.
Yes.
The board suggested where you were gonna put the elevator?
It was suggested by board member Farron that an interior elevator located on the western side of the house, midway down the western side of the house, around where the stairs are located, was a possible alternative site that we investigated.
So I hope you don't think I don't think that.
Okay.
You can say that you don't think it's, I don't think that's fair.
I suggested that.
Sorry, I wasn't saying the board spoke with one voice. There was members of the board who had suggested that. Sorry if that was misconstrued. So the Tanglewood case is also applicable here. And the Tanglewood case calls for an economic analysis in determining feasibility to the applicant. In that case, the applicant provided a cost analysis as to the alternatives provided. We have done the same in the record here, whereby the estimates from merit builders show the additional cost would exceed $1.3 million. In addition, a final treatise from Professor Terry Rice, an expert in New York land use and zoning law, has written, economic considerations are notably absent from the enumerated statutory standards of the five-part test. Such proof is not a necessary prerequisite to relief. However, that is not to say that such proof is irrelevant. Indeed, as indicated by the decision in Tanglewood, documentation of the economic infeasibility of complying with bulk requirements may be significant consideration in undertaking the mandated weighing analysis, especially as it relates to feasibility to the applicant. The evidence in this case is that while the interior elevator is a possibility, the instant proposal in front of the board scaled back from the more non-conforming previous alternatives is the only plan feasible to the applicant's needs. The third test of the five-part
Before
test.
you go to the third test, because I know we have a few more tests to go, but I just wanted to ask a couple of questions or I guess put it in perspective, because I know these other cases, when they talk about economic feasibility, may be different from this case. When we're talking about an additional $1.3 million to put in the elevator, what do you estimate the value of this house might be, or the value of the construction? Because isn't the economic feasibility to some extent relative to the value of the house? If the house is worth 30 times that, then 1.3 million on this record may not seem that significant.
An additional cost of $1.3 million to provide for an accessory mobility elevator is significant. Whether the total price tag of $2.6 million versus $1.3 million or $1.1 million, whatever it was, it is a significant piece of that feasibility to the applicant.
Julia, did you want to? Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
I actually have a question for Jeff Blinkoff. Jeff, when we're asked to determine what is a substantial request, whether it's a variance, relief, or square footage, there's usually some type of a formula. Do those same formulas apply in this instance, where 5% is considered a substantial request? And I think just empirically looking at, and I don't know that anyone would know the answer to this evening, but perhaps with the valuing the property is what it last transferred for, I would imagine. I mean, is that the same calculation, that if we're using economic cost as a variable for consideration that we should be thinking about?
I'm glad that you mentioned the part that I don't know if anyone would know the answer this evening. I would want to investigate that further for you. But I would certainly ask that council, I have the Baker versus Brownlee site certainly, but if you have the Tanglewood site, I'd appreciate that.
Sure, I can provide that.
I'd just like to have some guidance about what is a substantial request in this particular arena, and what would be the measurements that we should be considering, rather than estimating.
Understood. I will research and report back.
Thank you.
Council, the site for the Tanglewood case is 224 82nd 432.
Thank you.
It's a 1996 case from the second department.
Thank you.
Maybe addressing that question as it relates to substantiality. We're requesting a maximum height variance in this current application. If the board grants the maximum height variance, the height will be 53 feet. The current height as it exists there now is 53 feet. We're requesting the variance for that maximum height because we're sliding the front of the building, forward by 3 feet. So there's no change to the actual height. So therefore, it cannot be substantial. We are requesting 2 pyramid variances that are increasing the intrusion to the sky plane by an additional 5.1%, or 1,665 cubic feet. We believe that's the minimum that's necessary to support installation of the elevator, and therefore we don't believe that it is substantial. And I'll come back to this point when I talk in a moment, but I'll move forward with the fourth test.
Can I actually, sorry to interrupt
Sure.
you, can I go back to just the estimates for construction? That was provided by a construction company that is owned in part by the applicant, or they are an independent?
No, it's owned. They're independent. They're the original builders of the house.
Home.
Of
Okay.
the home.
Okay.
They're a local builder located on Mariner Drive in Southampton.
Would the homeowner be open to 2 other competitive bids?
We could look at that, but none of that is going to change the feasibility to the applicant, because while the cost, and we can have someone go look and provide competitive bids for that, but the feasibility to the applicant is only in small part economic. The larger part is accessibility and the increased distance that an interior elevator would require movement from the parking court.
But doesn't that make the presumption that the only way the applicant could access a interior elevator is to go all the way around the house, when they could just pull into the driveway and into the garage and walk the 15 feet to the elevator entrance, were the elevator placed in a central location in the house?
That would assume that the garage is used for daily parking, versus if that garage is very difficult to get down into. It has a steep entrance, and it's usually used for more for storage than it is for actual traversing cars in and out.
So a car can't park in the spot that
No,
is labeled garage?
there's parking spots. There's parking spots down there.
Right.
In the garage, but it's not as readily accessible and easy to use as for the homeowner.
But it's not infeasible for a car to pull into the garage and park.
It's possible. I would say to this applicant, it is infeasible.
Why exactly?
Unfeasible, not infeasible.
I was using using the board members.
My mistake.
I just wanted to.
I don't know. Maybe maybe we should pull up the garage or the ground level floor plan. I'm just not following you why they wouldn't be
Because-
able to get out of the car and walk.
It's because it's hard to enter. It's a highly
It's steep.
sloped. It's steep. It's a steep
it's
slope
steep.
pulling in.
He's not going to walk that, though. I'm assuming, he would drive, or his driver would drive in. And
He usually drives. Yes.
okay.
Yes. But he usually uses and parks his vehicle when he's driving in the parking court, and that's what he's looking to have access from the parking court to all, and then have access to all the levels of the home.
But it seems to me like if this is really about, he wants the elevator, right? And we want to give him the elevator. If I were applying for this and I wanted an elevator, wouldn't I be willing to say, all right, you know what? I'll just drive in instead of parking. Like, what's the big deal? How important is the ability to park outside and possibly have no elevator than to say, no, I'd be willing to drive into my home and get out and walk the closer
Because
distance.
it also disrupts all the other levels of the home. When you get up to the half story, it would remove the sitting area and block the entire views of the aesthetics of the western view and the southern view from the sitting area. You would eviscerate the sitting area in the half story.
Well, not if it was moved all the way to the western corner of that east-west ridge, where our wall heights are 8 feet and the ceilings are cathedraled. Those are substantial heights there, right? We've all seen the building sections. So it's certainly not a half story at that point.
Well, it is a half story, but they've looked at this. The engineers have looked at this. The engineers who designed the home looked at this, Silman, and we've provided for the record both their opinion as well as the analysis done by the architects that designed the home as to why it's infeasible to put the interior elevator option in.
So infeasible, you mean impossible?
Possibility is not one of the tests. It's feasible to the applicant.
But if something is infeasible, it means you can't do it, right?
It means it's not practical.
Unfeasible. Sorry. Unfeasible. I'm using unfeasible and impossible interchangeably, and you are not.
Yes, there's a difference.
Okay.
Because there is a test of practicability, and it's not just one of general possibility or general. The test is actually specific to the applicant.
Okay.
Can you showcase law for that?
That is the exact test as written. The exact test of the 5-part test.
No. I realize that's what you're saying. I want to know where in a court of law, it's up to the applicant to decide what's feasible.
Well, the statute would say that is there another alternative feasible for the applicant to pursue that would accomplish the benefit, in summary. I mean, I think that's what counsel is referring to, but the question is, does that make it a subjective or an objective test?
Right.
So I'll be happy to research that for you.
Thank you.
And I would say that the Brownlee case, shows that it's an objective test because it's a subjective test to the applicant because the patio it wasn't just to apply a patio, it was apply to a patio in order to allow a view from that patio.
But I don't know that case helps you that much. I mean, I read
Yeah.
that case, and it was about the view, and the board was telling them to put the patio in a location where they would not have a view. I mean, that
Correct.
seems to be a different case.
And we're positing to the board that putting the interior elevator further up the west side of the building is further away from the parking court, making it more unfeasible. Sorry, member Stevenson. unfeasible to our applicant.
But the
I
parking,
don't actually think what we're saying is, or what I'm asking is, you're saying there's nowhere in this house where you could put an elevator, is that correct? Because it's unfeasible, not based on Luke's suggestion. I'm not an engineer, I'm on this board.
Yes, the architects who designed this
Right,
structure.
I actually think that's weak, because they have something to protect. They were the rebar, so you've gone back to the architects that designed the house, who were paid $1 bazillion by the client, right? And they're now saying, I personally believe that we haven't told you what the alternative would be, if in terms of putting an elevator in the house. We haven't told you the location, have we?
No, members of the board have suggested.
One
an
member
alternative.
of the board suggested once, that's all, okay, just so the record is clear.
fair
I
enough.
I don't wanna go down, I personally don't wanna be included in that. I don't think it's up to me to tell you where to put the elevator, that's not my job.
Okay.
We didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead. We're on substantial, and you went back to
Unfeasible,
unfeasible.
UN.
If I could just raise one point in regards to Member Stevenson's things. We did at the last hearing, John Rose did join the board and offered testimony, and his testimony was that the location he thought the location best suited was the location that's being proposed as well. So it's not just one architect who designed it, or one engineer who made the structural rebar. It's also an additional well-respected local architect who has also joined in that same opinion.
But when Mr. Rose and I talked a little bit deeper into that, it did become clear that he hadn't fully examined the structural plans, and he did say, I believe, that he would have to go back and take a closer look at where exactly the post-tension beams were versus typical rebar. There's a big difference.
I don't believe that necessarily a fair characterization of his testimony, because I've had numerous conversations with him, having looked at the plans, because we've tried to look in every possible way to find the best location for the elevator.
Sure.
And every single time we've come back to this location, we've made it as small as we possibly can. And at the end of the day, this is where we have found it to be, best suited for this structure as it currently sits there.
I mean, I think what you've found is that you've located it in the easiest place to put it and the least expensive place to put it. But in so much as this board is concerned, I don't think that you've made a convincing argument yet.
But go through your. We don't want to interrupt your presentation.
Sure. So the fourth test is whether the proposed variance has an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood or district. Once again, the ARB has found this to be appropriate for the historic district, a more involved plan than what we're actually currently proposing. And again, the neighbors are supportive of the plan as it currently sits before the board. And finally, the fifth test is whether the alleged difficulty is self-created, which considerations should be relevant to the decision of the Board of Appeals, but should not necessarily preclude the granting of an area variance. Here, this is not a self-created issue. There's a doctor-diagnosed and recognized mobility impairment that would be served by having an elevator installed in the building. The applicant is entitled to reasonable accommodations from the board under the Fair Housing Act. The answer cannot be the owner should have bought a different house. The Fair Housing Act's stated purpose was to allow anyone, this owner or anyone else, to seek housing where they see fit without discrimination. The Fair Housing Act requires that a municipality take modest affirmative steps to accommodate them as long as the accommodation sought does not pose an undue hardship or substantial burden. Here, there's no substantial burden, there's no undue hardship in the plan that's before the board. So, you know, in conclusion, I think you've submitted, you know, substantial, you know, evidence into the record. And I think we fulfilled the 5-point test. We'll gladly provide an updated survey that shows the GFA calculation as it relates to the GFA issue, which I will remind the board that GFA is not something that's currently before the board. We're not asking for a GFA variance here.
No, and just to, I mean, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the GFA question really had to do with just this sense that the board has that this is an oversized house for this lot. So that was one more metric that we were looking at. Is it also oversized with respect to GFA? You know, we don't know, depends upon how big the property is, but it's not a big property. It's only, what, 88 feet wide?
The property is a single lot. The house that was built there with the benefit of permits.
Yeah, no, I understand, but it's, we're just
Also,
making the point.
It also had many variances.
You know.
It did have
And
variances.
sir, they should have been listed on the applications that you submitted to this board. Question 8. You
If-
did not. I went back and checked on your previous submission that you withdrew. That's important to me. And
Okay.
then you put, excuse me, then you have this whole discussion all of a sudden, which perked up my memory about what had gone on with all the lawsuits and VE districts and this particular property had the advantage of being granted many variances. Side yard, front yard, I didn't continue, but I could. And that should have been on the application. That's question number 8.
If it wasn't, we would gladly amend the application.
Good, that
It
would be
wasn't.
nice. Thank you. But twice, I can't believe that was just what, you just go past the questions and figure you don't have to answer? What goes on? Read the application. You submitted it to us.
I did.
Okay,
And this
well,
is-
I'm asking for the enumeration of all the variances that you received on this, that the property received. The variances go with the property. It's part of the consideration of a property, as Mark said, that is unusual in this area. It is. It was the smallest lot on Meadow Lane.
Do
And the house was built only because of those, in the size that it exists now, because of those variances.
Eh,
So given that the house was built with the benefit of permits and variances, and given that it doesn't meet today's building code, could you objectively
you mean
say...
zoning code.
Zoning code, sorry. Could you objectively say that it is an oversized house?
No, the house legally exists. The house has, when my client bought the house, he received an updated certificate of occupancy stating that the house in its current state met the requirements of the zoning code of the Village of Southampton.
But
So it's not oversized.
so could you say that it is over the size of what would be permitted to be built today?
Yes, it definitely is over the size as building. That's why we're here
Yeah.
for the variances, because the changes in the skyplane law basically would require, if we changed anything above the, halfway up the second story, we would require.
Yeah, so the house, the roof lines of the house and everything, and the pyramids, without take the elevator out of it, we're already talking about a house that couldn't be built today.
Correct, but
So you're asking to add, to
there's-
further that.
There's countless houses throughout the village that is the case.
Of course, you're the only one we're talking about today, though.
Correct.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, that's it. If the board, I'll gladly provide a list, an enumeration for Member Stevenson of the variances and the GFA, total calculation of a survey. Is there anything else the board
Julie,
requires
do you have
or
any
wants?
questions?
I don't have anything more to ask other than the inquiry that I made to Jeff Blinkoff, which I hope that we'll be able, the next time this property comes in front of us, that we'll be able to consider when we have all that information. Because if I'm being asked to consider that, the economics of it, I want to make sure that I'm using the right test for it.
Julia, would it be helpful to say what the state says about substantiability?
Will it reflect about the economics, and will it reflect the transfer price of this home so that the calculation can be clear, if there is one?
It's just guidance about how the board should view substantiability, if that was your question. I'm sorry, substantiality.
But substantiality is not a question of the economics. Economics is related to feasibility, correct?
Yeah,
I think that's the question that.
You know, what is
I'll be
interesting
looking
is that Julia and I did the training. Go ahead, Julia.
Go ahead.
I said a lot of this evening's discussions of feasibility, unfeasibility, impossibility. Frankly, you could also use convenience or inconvenience as a synonym. I think we're tossing around a lot of words that are especially meaningful to the person who's saying them, but I don't know that we're all on the same page in terms of word definitions tonight. But in terms of the economic impact that I'm being asked to think about and was cited tonight, I do want to hear the opinion from Jeff. And if you have something specific, Alec, that will inform that, I'm happy to hear it.
But Julia, didn't you mention to me that in the training that you and Luke took
Yes,
a month
Yes.
ago, Luke's gonna,
yes.
that it was
But
explained?
I do feel that if we're,
Well, but who's telling you what? Let's hear what the
Right.
municipal trainings, I'd love to hear what they said.
the cost of it. And he's asking us to consider it as a single number, but he's not contextualizing it, and I'm looking for that context. And as a board member, how we're supposed to consider those numbers. That's what I'm asking for.
Mm.
the question we may have now is, and I'm just going to ask you the same question, but the board can consider it at the same time, is are we moving toward closing this hearing and this is part of our deliberations, or do you want to leave the hearing open for all purposes in the event that during the course of our deliberations additional questions come up that we need to discuss with the applicant at a hearing?
I would be prepared to close it this evening.
What's your predilection at this point, Michael?
If we leave it open to, for maybe 2 weeks for written comment, so we can provide the board those documents.
Okay. Luke,
Well,
could you just say the thing that you learned in the trainings?
yeah, they said that the economics of it wasn't to be a deciding factor, but we can also reach.
Okay, I
Yeah,
know
we
that
can
that
reach
had
out
been
to
mentioned
them.
to me, and I just felt, I didn't do that training, I did a different one. I was just curious about how that was put out to you.
Yeah, but they also said anytime there is a question about it, reach out to them. These are state employees. We can give them the broad strokes of the case, and they
Oh,
can
okay.
maybe
Okay.
give us some guidance on
I
this.
would just object to that, because that's happening, you're talking about my case outside the presence of me being able to hear it or hear what they're saying.
Okay.
It's the government.
No, then
Just
we don't.
Just to clarify, I'm sure what council isn't saying, I can do any legal research that I choose to do for the board, and I can reach out to anybody that I choose to reach out to and report back to the board, which is what I will be doing.
Absolutely.
So to the extent there's any concern about that, I can certainly reach out to
But let
anybody
me just
that I choose
clarify.
to and report
Okay.
back. And-
If I called whoever it was, the NICOM, what are those people? Who was
Yes.
the trainers?
Yes.
Personally, and said, I'm on this board, and
What I'd suggest is that that's a legal issue that I'll be happy to talk to you about, and advise.
am
I
I
would-
enjoined from doing that?
I would like to
Am
speak
I enjoined
to,
from looking in a book?
I would like,
Okay, let's
no,
not talk
I do
about
not
it.
believe you are, but I need to,
don't want to be enjoined from learning something.
no, I do not believe that any
Sorry, I
board,
don't agree. Okay.
I didn't
Yeah.
say you were.
Okay.
What I
Okay.
said is that if a legal question is something that I usually speak
If
to
I
board
talk
members.
to more than one person on the board, I understand that as an open meeting.
Right. My
open
point-
meetings question.
My point is,
But my pursuit of finding something out
I
seems to
don't-
be not to be something.
I
that
don't
can be
believe you're,
subject
I don't
to
believe,
someone else telling me I can't do that.
I do not
Right.
believe you're prevented, but I
Okay.
normally, when
Well,
I
I
give a
hope
legal
not.
opinion, I usually give that
Okay,
directly to the board member outside of the presence of the
okay,
applicant.
thank you.
So in this instance, maybe Jeff is the right person to go to for that. In so much as the survey is concerned, we do agree that the GFA isn't really what we're being asked for here. So I don't know if it's going to change my opinion one way or another. So personally, I am in agreement with Julia that we could close this.
Well, we could still, I mean, Michael has offered to provide the survey. So
I have to be able to get the surveyor to, you know,
Yeah.
That's not so easy.
it's from
No.
Member Stevenson's, you know, lips
Yeah.
to God's ears.
Right. It's like, oh, you know.
We'll play it out, right? So we.
I mean, you're right, it's not necessary, and I still have the consideration that the letter of denial and the application
That's
says it's a
different.
40,000 square foot
If we
lot.
were to require a GFA variance, we'll be right back here in front of the board. I mean, it's not like the building department's going to approve, if this board were to grant a variance, we would go back to the ARB. We then have to go to the building department to have a permit issued. They're not going to issue a permit if the GFA is not in line.
But it's not in line. One says one thing, one says the other, right? Isn't that your question?
Well,
Yeah, no, this wasn't really about, I just want to put it in a perspective. This was not really about whether an additional variance was required. It was just one more way, one more metric to apply when looking at what appears to be an oversized house for the lot, which would become somewhat larger. So just one more metric was looking at GFA. We already have pyramid law relief, we have height relief,
Side and front.
we have, so I don't need it for the decision. So if you don't, feel the need on your behalf to submit the survey, if you don't think it helps you, then we can close the hearing for all purposes. But
And
I'm
the
leaving
board
it to
should
you,
be
I
aware-
don't mean to.
I'm sorry to interject, I just wanted to say, the board should be aware the survey that was submitted with the demolition of the prior house from 2013, I've made available on the Dropbox, it's part of the village's public records.
So what does that say?
8/27/2013.
Yes, that's the one.
49,076 square feet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
I mean, it raises the question then as to why the letter of denial issued by the building department said 40,055 square feet, but I hear
believe
you.
that was taken from the application forms. And like you mentioned earlier, it's possible that there were other surveys, because of this notion front lot that had a different calculation.
As I said, we can, what I would ask is that we at least leave it open for a week so I can provide provide clarification on that point for the board's edification.
I mean, does it
yeah.
make a difference?
No, whatever, it's up to you. I mean, it's your hearing, so I was just suggesting that we might be getting to the point of closing the hearing, but whether to close the hearing or not, or to suggest it, whether you presented your case, or if you can leave it, we can leave it open for all purposes too. This is entirely your decision.
Well, if 49,000 square feet is borne out, you're going to need another variance, right? You will need a
No,
GFA.
49,000, that's what our calculation is based on. Our
thought it was based
calculation
on
is based on,
40,000.
our calculation
No,
is based on,
if the lot is only 40,000,
Yeah.
they would need a GFA. variance.
I understand what you're saying. Okay, so, okay.
But
Got it.
I would like the list of all the variances that this property has received, please.
sure, and so, Mr. Chairman, if I may ask that the matter be closed for 2 weeks to provide written comment.
Okay, so we'll
So the
motion,
board's next meeting is March 14th, is my understanding.
Yep.
yeah, so we're closing the hearing and leaving it open for submission of written documents for the next 2 weeks. Is that what we're doing?
Yes,
Okay.
that's my request, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Okay.
So I'll motion to accept the applicant's request to close the public hearing in case number 3153, Smithtown Partners, 40 Meadow Lane, but allowing the submission of written documents for the next 2 weeks. Can I have a second?
Second,
And all in favor?
aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So we move on to case number 3147, excuse me, Andrew Fleiss, 64 Down East Lane.
Did you have a comment to make before they kick this off?
No,
No? Okay.
go, I'll let them.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We're here tonight, I'm here tonight on behalf of the applicants, Andrew Fleiss, Jennifer Carter, with respect to variances sought at 64 Down East Lane and various other approvals. Just to go over what brought us here today, as you may recall, this was originally an application for construction of a proposed dock with a kayak rack and various relief required for that dock, specifically setback relief for the rack and the kayak with respect to the side yard. Through the process, it was discovered that in 2000, there was a variance granted on this property, allowing for a second-story addition. The variance, though no covenant was ever required and those subsequent certificates of occupancy had issued with the buffer in its current state, the variance required as a condition that a buffer be instituted between the home and the border of Hetty Creek on which this property abuts, or which this property abuts. The dock plan, as proposed, conflicts with that proposed buffer, which spanned the entire width of the property and prohibited any access to the waterfront. Now, in one of the first meetings that we spoke, I went over the doctrine of riparian rights and how that is paramount to zoning, and how, as a waterfront property owner, my client is afforded access to the water. So in line with that, in line with the fact that the buffer has existed for some time in its current state, and that the village has issued COs in its current state, given the entirety of the situation, we've come up with a plan to revise that buffer, which would A, not compromise any protected land, B, increase the protected land in proximity to the dock and afford my client access to the water, which he is permitted under the doctrine of riparian rights, access to the water to build the dock and to have access to the dock. Now, given the recent code amendment, the property was deemed to be, because of its current state, the buffer's current state, the property was deemed to be not in compliance with zoning or with prevailing regulations and conditions of the property. And as a result, we first have to deal with the buffer. So before we can get to the dock, we have to deal with the buffer. Now, Mr. Walker is going to get up momentarily and discuss the revised plan for the buffer. But I would ask the board to consider, and we can have this discussion after the revised buffer plan is presented. If the board is inclined to approve the revised buffer, to give my client some time to replant the buffer, as right now is not an opportune time to plant, as you certainly are aware. You can condition the buffer being replanted on the actual construction of the dock. But I think rather than holding off the dock up until he's actually had an opportunity to replant the buffer would be, wasting this board time and resources as well as that of my client. So our proposal is going to be that you, if you are inclined to approve the revised buffer plan, that you do so with an allowance of time to replant the buffer. And then, again, at that point, if that is approved, this property would be immediately in compliance and we can proceed with the dock application. So Again, we can speak to that after you hear the revised plan for the buffer, and I'll turn it over to Jim from Inner Science, who will go through the revised plan.
Before, Carl, before we do the revised plan, I missed a couple of steps you took. Are you saying that the wetlands buffer that was required as a condition to the prior wetlands permit to put the second story on this house deprived your client of its riparian rights because it didn't provide a pathway to the water?
I'm saying that the buffer as presented did not account for that. That's correct. And I believe it was for a variance, not necessarily just for wetlands approvals. There was a variance that afforded a second-story addition. But regardless, that's not really relevant. The buffer that was put on, correct. So we're asking for an amendment in line with that. But I think you'll see from the plan that the buffer presented affords a more similar, if not additional, protection to the wetland species adjacent to the property and just north of Hetty Creek.
I have a riparian rights question. It's because it's new to me. Does the homeowner's riparian rights guarantee him free access to the water, or does it guarantee him a wooden structure that goes up a couple steps and down a couple steps over the wetlands?
Access,
Access.
that's right.
Okay.
Now, it gives access to navigable portions
Right.
of the, so it's been interpreted that you can get access into that navigable portions of the water.
Okay.
But you're right, it's just access. It doesn't guarantee
Okay.
a wooden catwalk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it.
If there are no further questions, I'll turn it over to Jim. Okay.
I apologize, but I always like to look at a plan when I'm presenting. That's the plan. Riparian rights refer to the ability to wharf out to navigable depths. Does refer to wharf or up here. In a traditional sense, that's what riparian rights means. The plans that were approved were drawn by Tim Rumpf in 2000. They were part of a Gil Flanagan variance that was issued by this board. That particular buffer occupied 2,000 square feet. Excuse me. I want to make sure I get the numbers right. 7,000 square feet. Sorry. So 7,000 square feet. This guy bought the property. The buffer was no longer there. I don't know who removed it. I don't know if that makes any difference to the board. Problem was that the buffer is no longer there. It was 7,000 square feet. It was part of a variance granted by the board. So what we told the property owner is you're going to have to come back to the board with a greater amount of square footage. This buffer provides.
We can't, Jim, we can't see that, and
Neither can
we're not
anyone.
picking it up on camera. So I know you're referring to it, but
We submitted it.
no, but
correct
for
way.
purposes right now, board member Julia McCormick can't see it, I can't see it, and it would be nice to have it as part of the presentation, so I'm really just.
Alex can probably pull it up.
Yeah.
Or I can.
Oh.
It's called Fleiss Modified Buffer 2022-11-22. Alex, are you able to find that?
Let me see. Jim, are you not able to pull that up? Do you need me to do that?
I have it handy, Alex.
Thank you.
I just got
We submitted it to the.
promoted to a panelist.
Well,
Yeah.
Understood, but applicants are also.
While they're pulling that up, I have a question. The buffer, when it was written in at that time, was it defined specifically as a square footage volume of buffer, or was it that line that was drawn across?
I measured the line on Tim Rumpf's plan. I got the plans from the building department. Alex provided them.
So they didn't say you need to provide a wetlands buffer of 7,000 square feet.
No.
They had just sort of, it was a line on the plan that was parallel to
That's
the
cor-
shoreline that was
That's
set
correct.
back a certain amount of
And
feet.
typically, a modern covenant on a wetlands buffer would include a meets and bounds description and
Yeah.
a general description of how many square feet it was.
Okay.
In any case, now that our colorful into science plan is up there. We're proposing 7,500 square feet. And the reason why we're doing this is straightforward, full disclosure. The guy built a swing set down by the fence. He would like to keep his swing set. I don't think the swing set is something that typically is involved with a lot of zoning and wetlands setback issues. But the long and the short of it is, in that little corner, he has a flat area and he installed a swing set. So we would like to keep the swing set. We would like to, instead of removing the swing set and providing the same exact buffer that Tim originally drew, we would like to propose a different buffer which occupies a little more area and a little additional square footage to compensate for a kayak dock down to the water. 7,500 square feet seems to be a reasonable number. We didn't tell Andrew Fleiss that he should remove the existing Japanese maple. It's not a native tree. It is a tree that is well established and it's doing well, and it seems a shame to remove it. So we would propose to keep it. Other than that, it's masses of native shrubs, it's drifts of native wildflowers, it's clumps of native grasses. We did show along the property line more intense native shrubs because they perform well to keep people out of the wetlands. And there's some groundsel bush down by the wetlands line in the area where it points down to the water. The kayak rack is moved north of the wetlands boundary. The path that goes down to the dock is 4 foot wide, and it's a bark mulch path, which is 4 foot wide. These are things that typically we see, and they do perform well for wetlands projects. The little clump of inkberry up at the top is to guide people to the path. These are convenient things that we learn that work well to keep people out of the wetlands buffers, but to get them to the path down to the dock. That's what you have in front of you. I don't really have a whole lot else to report to the board. We did send out the public notices. We did all the new public hearing documentation with the help of the village officials. We are done with the Board of Trustees. We were issued a permit on the 11th of October. We are done with the DEC. They just issued a permit on the 24th of January. We're done with the Department of State. They also issued a permit on the 24th of January. Why is that important to the board? The board should be aware that we were told to make the drop platform at the very end 4 foot by 6 foot to protect wetlands vegetation, and that is a good thing. So those permits and approvals are all issued. Typically, we're ahead with the village and behind with the state and the federal government. But in this particular case, because of the complications with the buffer, we're ahead with the town and the state, and we're behind at the village. So I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
I guess the question I would have, and I'm not sure if it's, if it matters, but you keep referring to it as a variance that required the buffer. Do you have that decision? Because I thought it was a wetlands permit. What variances were involved?
I don't know, but I have it because Alex provided it to me.
We have that decision. It's for the second story.
It says required,
But I thought
It says wetlands permit.
right, it was a,
You are correct. I don't see a variance in this decision. And this is November 21st, 2000. Kevin Guidera reads the wetlands conditions of approval, and I do not see a variance, and you're correct.
so at the
Mark.
time the applicant came forward to this board and requested a second story on a house. And the board said yes, but as a condition, the property needs to have a wetlands buffer.
I believe you're correct.
And
The wetlands buffer was to occupy 15 feet of the current lawn, which is, that
15
is the,
feet width.
that is the Tim Rumpf plan that, I got from the, from Alex. The 15 feet is referenced in the decision on the wetlands problem.
Okay, is there any way to superimpose that buffer
Mark,
relative to the buffer that, or just,
We did it once. Probably should do it again if you're going to weigh that information. I don't want to give you a good guess. We'll do it precisely and hand it back to the board for a continuation.
well, what's the average width of the buffer that you're implementing
The buffer,
or suggesting?
the buffer that I'm proposing is actually quite wide. It goes up into the lawn a long ways. I would say it's in excess of 100 feet at the longest part. And this original buffer and the wetlands permit that you referred to was to occupy 15 feet of the lawn at the current time. So it goes clear across the property, does not neglect the southeast corner of the property, but it's a more even and straight line, and now we're proposing more on the west and less on the east. And again, perfectly honest, the reason being is the guy constructed a swing set and he would like to keep it. He has a family and they want to live and use their swing set the way it was installed. We could burden the property with a non-fertilization covenant for that portion of the property where the swing set is. There's no harm in keeping fertilizers and lawn chemicals out of kids' playground area. There's a swing that's in the trees there. There are also some big trees in that southeast corner of the property. We're not showing those as the covenant, but the long and the short of it is there's, I believe, 3 big trees there.
Do any board members have questions for Jim or Carl?
No.
In terms of the swing set, what are we talking about here? 5 feet? You know, what's the, what's different from what was required in 2000? Let's put it that way. Over there by the swing set.
The swing set probably,
I'm from Ohio, this is quite hard for me, go ahead.
the swing set probably occupies 5 or 10 feet of the required 2,000 Tim Rumpf buffer.
Okay,
It doesn't go right up to a fence. You don't put a swing set right next to a fence, but
I hope not.
it's 15 or 20 feet away from the,
Yeah, that's what
fence.
I'm asking. If the original 2000 was 15 feet from the water, is that correct? Or what is the width? What is the variation in width that from the requirement from 2000?
we're missing approximately 15 feet at the southeast
Okay.
corner of that, right along the fence.
And what's the total?
We're proposing 7,500, where 7,000 was approved in
No,
2000.
the total measuring where the, if you're measuring in feet,
That's
how
great
it was
that you have that.
measured in
Thank you.
2000, right?
How wide? The wet,
Yeah.
the wetlands buffer was approximately 25 feet.
So only 10 feet is left with the swing set?
That's about right.
Okay,
Is there any
thank
way
you.
to put that up
I'm
on
gonna.
the screen? Luke has a great visual.
Really?
Yeah, it's very helpful.
Whoa.
I
Some
think
of
you-
those, images where it's like now, where everything's brown, is that what we're getting here?
Close.
Okay, that's sort of frightening. Although I bet it's not that brown this year.
I was just in Maine. There is snow in some part of the country.
I saw that on TV, but
You have
I-
you have to get above Portland, and
Right.
then there's snow.
I'm not a big fan because I have to be plowed out, no matter what.
Alex, I'm going to,
Luke, can you take us down?
no, I'm going to email you a photo. I don't have the, yeah, I'm happy to. I tried looking for the link in my inbox. Is there an easy way for me to join the Zoom?
How about he invites you?
It said the link is on the agenda, if you have the agenda.
Okay, I can do that.
First paragraph.
Okay, there we go. All right, thank you for bearing with me. I'm opening Zoom. southamptonvillage.org. You have me in the room?
Not yet.
Here I come. Okay, so look, here we have
The old one.
the old one, yes, and then here we have the proposed, and let's just focus in on the property boundary lines, right? Let's see if I sized them
Not bad.
right. So
Wow.
close, very close,
You
but I
could,
think it's close enough to get a sense of.
you could get a job at
Uh-oh.
an environmental consulting firm.
Okay.
An architect.
All right. So look, here's what was proposed.
No, that was a condition to the prior wetlands permit.
So this is what is required, right? During,
The green is the 2000
Yeah.
permit.
Right,
Okay.
so that is all missing, that green?
and you are proposing to not do this part where there is the swing set, but you are proposing to go
North.
deeper into the property on this section here. Accurate.
That's a pretty good characterization.
Okay.
It's probably not precise, but it's close.
Okay.
It's very
Just for
close.
illustration.
Yeah.
There are trees on the east property line. Those do appear to be Timrum's trees. There are birch trees there that look like they were part of the plan. Again, and typically to resolve this, you just redo the whole thing. On the other hand, the guy has a family with small children that wants to use a swing set that he installed without knowledge that that was a buffer area. There are large trees, and we could show you photos of those. At least one of them is a birch tree, and one of them has a swing hanging off one of the branches. These are areas that are being used. So the idea is to try to do a little more, a better or bigger buffer on the areas that are not occupied by a swing set. That's really the long and the short of it. Not adversarial. It's really the guy's trying to maintain something that he bought and installed for his children.
So the swing set's what, approximately where this circle is here?
You're pretty close.
Yeah.
There are trees more or less around all that stuff. He has a number of other things that aren't in the wetlands buffer, which are playground equipment.
What about a buffer like that?
What's that?
What about a buffer like this? We take your point here, and we come all the way across, we allow a clearing around the swing set. He gets to keep the swing set. That seems very important. And he improves, he following your strategy of improving upon the buffer.
If your idea is of a different buffer, Carl's gonna have to go speak to Andrew Fleiss, and I'm gonna have to draw something for you, and we'd have to come back and say hello to your board again.
So, it seems a lot more substantial. I didn't realize it was, with the overlay, it makes it obvious that what was required, I don't know what was.
Well, let me put this in some context, so we go back. We have a new piece of legislation on the books that simply requires that we don't process an application until
It's fixed.
you implement the buffer to which there was agreement previously. You're saying, no, we're not gonna do that buffer. We'll do a different buffer, but we're not gonna do that buffer. And we're not going to do it, and again, correct me if this isn't your position, but as of right now, we don't wanna do that buffer unless you also entertain a dock permit.
I don't think the dock's part of the application at this point.
Well, the
That's my
dock,
question.
the dock is secondary to it's all considered in one application, but I think the way council and I have discussed proceeding is we have to address this aspect first. And I think, to put it differently, we are asking permission to install a revised buffer. And certainly your feedback is appreciated as to what that can be. And the revised buffer is actually in line with his rights to access the water. And I think that's an important point that wasn't considered back in 2000. And again, I apologize I ever doubted you. It was a wetlands permit, not a variance. That's my mistake. Now, remember Farron's proposal. I think that would be difficult to enforce. Chick, I don't know if you that's something that kind of carves out a little walkway niche like that. But if there are ideas for a sort of a revised approach to this buffer, we would certainly consider them.
Well, look, we talked about me making suggestions to applicants earlier
I know
on.
it was not the board's suggestion.
So look, I'm not suggesting that. My opinion is that it's difficult for me, and I'm going to ask Chick actually, it's difficult for me to consider a wetlands buffer proposal that seems at least to be less than the 2000 requirement. Now, we know how the water flows. Maybe, Chick, you have the viewpoint that given that the trickle of water kind of ends as we go east here, maybe it is more important to have more of a buffer on the west side of the property than the east, in which case maybe the proposal makes more sense here.
Yeah, but the problem that I'm still having trouble with is either the board is going to enforce prior conditions or not, and I'm not sure we want to get
Start doing
into the
that.
business of evaluating
Sure.
those
Yeah.
prior conditions, because then
Right.
we're disregarding a prior condition for which the applicant achieved a clear benefit. The question that I'm having at this point is it completely separate? In other words, are we looking at this buffer and approving this buffer and then later considering the dock? In other words, let's say this happens.
Yeah.
Okay. The board looks at the buffer and perhaps there is an adjustment to the buffer. Okay. We issue a decision, then do we consider the dock? Or is the applicant saying, I would only implement this buffer, for which there might be a requirement that it's a recordable covenant, but I'll only do this in case of approval for the dock? Because I'm just opening up the possibility that the board could say, yes to this buffer, but then later when considering the dock, say, no to the dock.
Understood. So the buffer, in my opinion, has to be amended to account for his riparian rights. No, they are, even though they're considered under one application, I guess, or one agenda item, they're distinct. And whether or not he pursues the dock, which he is pursuing, but whether or not he does, we are here on this revised buffer plan, because the reality is, right now, according to the building department, his property does not exist in compliance. So he has to address that. And there's two ways of addressing it. One way is to plant that buffer and then get determination from the building department that he is now in compliance, or this board. Or the second is, which we're still calling it new, right? The new, yeah, which the code amendment calls for and permits, is that you come to seek redress of your, you can seek redress, or you can seek modification of the condition that creates the nonconformity to the board that has authority to amend it. So we're allowed to come before you to amend the buffer plan so as to get into compliance. And then we can consider the dock.
We're on the same page.
We're on the same page.
And when you say amend the buffer plan, at minimum, you're talking about wanting a pathway from the lawn to the water.
That's correct.
And
I can't say at minimum. The
But that's what you're referring to when you say it needs to be amended to account for his riparian rights.
That's right. Either way, you're correct. That's what I'm
Okay.
saying. Now, the applicant has a preference, and we are advocating for a preference in a way that I think achieves the purpose of the buffer. And I think Member Farron had a good point, and that is, the operative question here is the intent of the buffer, is the goal of the buffer achieved by what we're proposing? And that is certainly a question Mr. Voorhees can weigh in on, and I'm certainly
We're
not
the
going to
same
put him
page.
on the spot.
Chick, we're ready for you.
All right, I am going to put you on the spot.
No, I don't feel that way at all. So I just want to clarify one thing. When Mr. Governale talks about the riparian rights as related to the prior approval, what the board,
Yeah, Mr. Who?
Carl,
Carl.
Benincasa, I'm sorry. Carl. I would have done better with the first name, I know this guy. Sorry. The original plan was approved as requested by the applicant in 2000. And the Tim Rumpf Aris design plan did not show access through the buffer to get to the waterway. So we do know that a permit is needed to go through a buffer area. And this board reacts to those permits, based on the standards for issuance of a permit in Chapter 116. So I just don't want it to seem like there's been any denial of riparian rights. It wasn't requested. It was approved as requested in 2000. It had a buffer. It did not request a dock or access through the buffer. Obviously, their application, Carl Benincasa's application, is to seek that new structure. So I had prepared a memo for the last meeting, and all I really did was go through the law that Mr. Blinkoff and I have spoken about. So I think we've established this, but if there is a non-compliant situation, which has been determined by the building inspector, there's a provision for processing where if all sums are paid to the village, and substantially the sole purpose of the processing is to cure the violations or seek a variance from the Board of Appeals with regard to such violations. So that's why I think the chairman's exchange with Carl was very informative. I am noticing that on the publication for the purpose of tonight's meeting, number 1 is for the kayak dock. We're not really considering that at this time. Number 2 is for landscaping and clearing pursuant to a wetlands permit buffer plan within 125 feet regulated area for landscaping. And number 3 is an accessory structure or a swing set to be located within 150 feet. That's all what has been published. And at the bottom on our agenda, it says that they're seeking modification of the condition of the original Decision 2269 from 2000 to allow for the proposed buffer clearing and the accessory structure, which is the swing set. So all the wonderful graphics that Luke did, that member
Thank you.
Farron did, are great. But my opinion is this should be submitted by the applicant. It should be on a plan. It should be exact measurements. We should be able to see where the buffer was, similar to what member Farron prepared. That should be calculated accurately. And we should see where the swing set is, because that's what's being requested for relief within 150 feet. We look at setbacks. What's the setback? Where's the buffer? What was the buffer that was intended? What's the buffer they're proposing? I think that the applicant does need to justify why the swing set can't be moved. And if the board is satisfied with that explanation, whether it's with offsetting considerations such as an expanded buffer, that's fine. That's really what we want to get to here. But we need exact information, and I would absolutely look for that buffer to be closer to the swing set, but we don't even know where it is. So those would be logical questions once we have the information that would allow us to intelligently discuss the application with all of that information. So I would ask that, the prior buffer be shown on a plan accurately. And there could even be differences in the wetland boundary from the 2000 to the current wetland boundary. That should be accounted for as well. The area should be calculated. The calculation of the buffer area for the proposed condition pursuant to their request should also account for the loss of buffer with respect to the pathway going through, the kayak rack itself, which decreases the buffer in favor of other structural improvements. The plan that was up before was not the most recent plan that was submitted by the applicant, and I'll get you the date, but there was a later submission on February 8th that had a wider pathway and a little different configuration, and also accounted for the 4x6 platform at the end that Jim said the other agencies have permitted. So, those are my comments. I think we really need good information in order to discuss it, and we want to be looking at the prior buffer, the proposed buffer, accurate calculations, location and setbacks of the swing set, and the applicant should look at Chapter 116 and show that they meet the conditions for issuance of a permit in consideration of all those factors. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Alex, I have one quick question for you. Does the swing set need setback relief, possibly? In other words, is this beyond a
Zoning
wetland?
set, so I don't know.
Was the swing set an accessory structure, or every single person with Southampton with a 4-year-old's in violation, right?
Well, it depends on where it's installed. I just want to know, I was just asking
Yeah, we'd
Alex,
have
if,
It is.
is it a wetlands permit issue, or is
I
it?
think my
yeah.
children might be
The
involved in some
building
kind of
inspector,
violation.
I don't know if it qualifies as an accessory structure for which a permit would be necessary. other than the
Okay,
fact that it
so
can't
we'll
be
just
an-
look at it when we see the updated document. So can we adjourn this?
And Julia has her hand up. I don't know if you can see her right now. but
No, I
want
can't
to-
because she became a small,
Yeah, what's the deal here? She's in the meeting. She got minimized.
She became
Yeah.
a postage stamp.
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, her dog's there too.
Go ahead, Julia, we can
Can I
hear you.
ask my question?
Yeah.
Which is, my original understanding, which we've talked about in a hearing at a previous time, I think about this very property, was because of the new legislation, the legislation was quite restrictive in terms of how we were supposed to be handling each piece of requests, and that the repair of the violations were to come first. I think that it would give me comfort to have an understanding from Mr. Blinkoff what is the order in which we should be considering this. I appreciate understanding the totality of the request, but how, as a board, are we meant to address it? First the violation, then have them come back and process it after that.
It-
And I recognize that we're feeling our way through this right now, but
My understanding is, as you just stated it, that what would happen is if there was an existing violation, what has to happen first is that the violation is cleared. The applicant can say, what we're going to do is put in exactly what was approved before, or the legislation does allow, and this is what Mr. Benincasa was saying, the legislation does allow, as was also mentioned by Mr. Voorhees, they can say, as to that violation, we are seeking to cure it by seeking a variance or a modification. They can do that. What's been put on the record tonight, and I have a comfort level having heard it from Mr. Benincasa and through the other gentleman, is that they're going to comply with that requirement in the code. They recognize that there is a larger stated application before the board, but they've made clear to this board that consistent with that local law, they will address the issue of the open violation first. And they also, in an answer to a question by the chair, they are not making a representation that they're saying, well, we'll only clear that violation if you agree that you're then going to grant the second part, because the chairman was very clear. That's going to be a second consideration in terms of the request as far as the kayak and the rack. It's a separate issue. It may be on the agenda, but it's been made clear tonight, and I think the applicant's counsel will confirm this, but I'm very clear on it. They're proposing to deal with what the code allows right now, and only allows right now, which is the board will process that portion that would deal with the existing violation as to the buffer. That's where they are.
That's correct.
So this board, consistent with the local law that was passed, I think Chick Voorhees said was in June, would be dealing with that first. After that's addressed, if the applicant wishes, the next step could be taken. But first steps first, compliance with the local law first. And just to finish that thought, staying with what is supposed to be dealt with first, what I think Mr. Voorhees was saying is that he would strongly suggest that the board receive clear drawings of exactly what's proposed that would clear the violation or that explains the modification sought, so that the board knows exactly what they're looking at dimensions-wise and in terms of the swing set, so that the board really knows what they're dealing with. So it's a real clear picture.
Yeah, first, to Mr. Voorhees' request, entirely reasonable, and we will prepare those documents. As to questions about process, I would defer to counsel. My interpretation, yes, we are compelled to be here for the buffer. Either we plant what was approved or we seek modification. So seeking modification, we are compelled to be here. We have chosen to be here for the dock. The buffer comes first. We understand that. And that's why that's the primary focus of tonight's discussion. The fact that we have already presented on the dock was only due to the fact that we didn't realize we were not in compliance until the planning department discovered it. Had we known at the beginning, this is what the process would have been from the start. I agree that needs to be resolved before we move forward. I do not think there is any sort of required time gap between getting conformance and approving the dock. So I think, at my reading of the law, there's nothing that would prohibit you from doing it at the same meeting if you approve the revised plan first.
That you would not be given a building permit for the dock until the building department clears the first cure of the setback?
They're
buffer?
separate, so we can address the buffer first, and then.
With the covenant.
Right.
We would do a covenant so that we don't have this same issue again.
Okay, just,
But do you guys mind if I ask a question about the dock? Is that your final location for that dock? Couldn't it be moved a little bit further west? You're asking for 10 feet where 35 is required.
I think that the location was determined, one, in proximity to navigable waters.
yeah.
So I think the closer we got to that side yard, the easier it is to get to the navigable water. Because the more east you go, the less navigable the water goes. I mean, that's a question, not to pass the baton, but I think that's a question.
But I mean, if you throw a rock in that little tributary tributary thing, how deep is that? You know, if you go farther to the.
Depends on what time of day.
To the west.
We submitted soundings, that, that arm of Hetty Creek is dry at low water.
Yeah, so I figured.
If you throw rocks, you're gonna hit Fred Havenmeyer's dock.
Okay,
Which is now owned by Sims Lansing. It's very narrow. We're trying to launch a kayak. This is an appropriate place for a kayak dock. Main reason is, this area has been open, and it has the least amount of intertidal marsh of the whole shoreline, and the more you push up to the west, the wider area you're going to have to cross wetlands to get to the water. Kayak docks are constructed 4 foot 5 inches to the bottom of the girders, or the top of the ledger board. Reason being, we grow Spartina alterniflora underneath them. They are decked with through-flow decking. Reason being, it provides 60% light transmissivity to the wetlands to allow the wetlands to grow. Here's your wetlands line. If we move here, we're crossing a lot more wetlands. It's probably a poor idea. Not really based on the depths of the water, but access to the water is better to the west. But crossing wetlands with a dock, we always cross at the skinniest expanse of wetlands. Moreover, we are regulated by 5 regulatory agencies with a dock, and I have 3 permit agencies that tell me I'm putting the dock in the correct place. We moved the kayak rack uphill away from the drop platform where they're going to put a kayak in the water. Again, the reason being is we're avoiding wetlands impacts. We're going to plant some groundsel bush in front of it. The area that's cleared can obviously be planted with groundsel bush, which is a good accompaniment to the entire intertidal marsh that's there. Mr. Voorhees spoke about the quality of the salt marsh in that particular area. The best complement is if you plant some groundsel bush above it. High tide bush is your best buffer planting plan, period. So those kind of things, we're going to come back to the board with the 4 items that Mr. Voorhees asked for. And I think our latest plan was revised for the DEC, and it's probably not the latest plan. So let me go back. I'm going to rethink our best effort, and we're going to come see you when you tell us to come back.
So the next meeting is not till March 14th, is that good?
So we'll see you in March.
That's correct. So I'll motion to, Chick, do
Is
you have
there
more to
anybody
say?
here?
Go ahead.
What?
In March 14th, I'll be in Florida. My son's playing baseball.
Oh,
Um,
Good for you.
It's a week-long college tournament, so
so you can choose any?
we'll
the
send
next
Carl.
meeting after that.
We'll send Carl.
All right, that's you for
Go
you.
ahead, Chick. Let's move this along.
Yeah.
Sure. I just wanted to, in review of the plan, we talked more about the mechanics and square footage and things like that. I'd also ask that on the plan itself, where the little blue stem is specified and the panicum, if you could indicate spacing. I didn't see your typical narrative. Maybe it's part of other permits, but I don't seem to have it in my record. So anyway, updated spacing, number of plants for panicum and little blue stem, and consider additional shrubs, just as you were saying. Groundsel bush is great, just to help things along when we get to the point of having all of that information. That's all.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman,
for-
I just didn't know if there was anybody who wished to.
Oh, we should. Is there anybody from the,
Huge number of people,
sure?
yeah.
Okay. So I'll motion to adjourn for all purposes, case number 3147, 64 Down East Lane. Can I have a second?
Second,
And all in favor?
Is that till March 14th?
no, he didn't say.
No, it can be until, whenever the applicant's ready. but right now it can be March 14th.
We just need
Wanna go?
a date to put
Well,
on the.
I just had a question, Mr.
Do you want
Benincasa?
us to put March 14th or
Next,
He said he's gonna be away,
We'll have somebody else come too.
okay.
The shortest date, whatever.
so March
Okay.
14th.
so to March 14th,
You
Alex?
could have somebody better from my office.
Okay. Mark, could I just go outside for 2 minutes?
Of course,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Take a break.
No, I'll be right back by the time you get to the next.
Okay.
Just
We're good.
pretend I,
We're going to move forward to case number 3145, 44 Hillcrest Lane.
I'm also gonna take my leave unless you.
Thank you very
want me
much.
to stick around.
No, I think you're good, and thank you.
And for council, this application upcoming was re-advertised. I think you have some revised affidavit.
Yes. I have the mailing notices, which I'll make a part of the file, Alex.
Excellent, thank you.
Should I begin or should I wait for member Stevenson to return?
Go ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, council, and Mr. Voorhees. My name is Denise Shern. I'm the attorney for the applicant. As you may recall, at the last meeting, we withdrew a request for the garage that was going to be situated between the swimming pool and Miller Road. And we were requested to submit a revised survey reflecting that, along with some screening that we're proposing for the swimming pool. So we've submitted to the board a revised survey with that garage removed and depicting the proposed screening as well. What we haven't done is shown you an additional 2 parking spaces. We need 4 parking spaces instead of the 2 that are shown in the front. So I've gone back to the engineer for the septic and also the surveyor to talk to them about the best possible location for those parking spots. But I thought since I had to be here to open the public hearing, that I would also give the board the opportunity, should they wish, to give some input as to where they would like to see them. I mean, there's not a whole lot of options, as you can see on the property, as far as where we would fit an extra 2 spots, except if we situate them along the Miller Road side. The applicant is amenable to using grass pavers, which I understand are recommended in your latest comp plan. Seem to be working really well. So we'd be happy to do that. But we do need to revise our survey to reflect those 2 spaces for you.
I don't think it's up to us to tell you what to do in terms of where.
No, I just thought I would throw it out there if the board had a suggestion. If you don't, that's totally fine. We'll come back with a design.
We don't have a suggestion as to where to put them, except that we were considering a condition that we don't have ingress and egress off of Miller Road.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was some way to, have this application be conditioned upon arriving and leaving from Hillcrest and still providing, I think that would be.
Didn't they can't get the car past the house. Isn't that what we learned one time?
Yes, that's correct.
So how would you propose?
It'd just be a wider parking lot on the Hillcrest side, I think is what Mark is suggesting.
Oh, I see. Okay, I understand what you're saying.
That's
So
cool.
wider parking area in the front of the dwelling, so on the Hillcrest side.
Well, I don't see how you get parking on the Miller side, given the setback requirements for your sanitary system and the fact that the new system is partially above ground.
Yeah, we could, but that's why the septic engineer is looking at it for me right now to see if we can site it anywhere else. I'm not that hopeful that we have many other options in terms of where the septic can be located. I know we can have parking over the expansion pools, if we use load-bearing covers, and we submit the proposed, the covenant that
With a covenant,
that
right?
the health department requires. So that may be an option for them as well, to put the grass pavers over them. But the Miller Road side is, when the applicant went to the ARB for the renovations to the house, the ARB approved parking on the Miller Road side, 3 spaces on the Miller Road side. But that's not what the applicant would like to see. They don't want 3 gravel spaces on the Miller Road side. I think that's probably what the board would not want to see either.
Okay, let's see what you can
Come up with?
come up with.
Sounds good.
So we're going to adjourn for all purposes?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'll motion,
Wait, does
sorry.
anyone
Oh,
wanna say
yeah.
anything?
Oh,
Just-
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, we should do that.
Probably not, but.
Julia, do you have anything to say with
I
respect to
meant the
this?
public.
No, I don't.
Tajay, we don't have anybody from the public that, okay, so I'll adjourn for all purposes, case number 3145 44 Hillcrest Lane. Can I have a second?
Second,
And all in favor?
aye.
Aye.
And it does not appear that anybody is here for case number 3152, 125
Lisa
Burnett.
was in the chat.
Oh, wait, she's
Is
doing
she?
a Zoom.
Oh, she's
Yeah,
zooming
we're
from,
gonna be
she's
joining
zooming
by
from
Zoom.
Mexico,
All right,
just to make us jealous?
yeah, I guess so. It was a nice day,
Mm.
really nice.
This application has also been re-advertised, and council, I understand we have new affidavits of mailing and posting.
It says it has been re-advertised.
It has been, yes.
It has, yep, so
Okay.
we have new affidavits, that's correct.
I have them.
That's
Great.
fine,
Great.
thanks for you.
Okay, so let's.
Yes, I am zooming in from Mexico.
Yeah, yeah. I thought, Lisa, I thought after what transpired at the ARB, you might await their, you know.
No, you know something, I think at the ARB, most of the conversation had to do with how the addition connected to the existing house. And I don't think it really had anything to do with the portion of the property that I'm asking for the variance for, so I would like to proceed.
Okay, go ahead.
I can share my screen. I think. And nothing has changed since we last spoke. Can you all see my screen?
No, yes,
Okay. So nothing has changed since we last spoke. I'm still looking for the same setback relief, 25 relief. 25 feet is that dotted line right across there. The existing house is at 22.2 feet off of the north property line, which backs up to the school. And I'm asking for this 53 square feet, well, it's 53 square feet of existing. I'm asking for 30 square feet of second floor space. And then I'm also asking for this, which was the part that had not been advertised before, which was the increase in the lot coverage. So nothing has changed based on what we asked for previously. Like I said, the ARB, they had some concerns about whether the, like whether it was a weird connection between how I met the existing roof line. So I don't really think it had anything to do with the portion of the house that I was asking for relief for.
And I should mention, at least I think the architecture review board was expecting that the zoning board might issue a determination first in this case.
Correct. They would not have, even if they were in love with the project 100%, they would not have granted it without the ZBA approval anyway, correct?
well, I don't have a problem with it.
Yeah, we don't have a problem with it. We just want to, if the ARB was to, adjust the roof lines in any way, we just want to make sure that we're approving the same thing. But
Right, well, I'm not asking for any pyramid relief or any, it's not, the pyramid is kind of way far away from where my addition is proposed, so I'm not looking to go any closer to the property line. Anything that I do is going to still happen over the existing footprint. I don't think that the variance can change. It was really a matter of how I connected to the existing ridge line here and whether it was subservient to the existing house. So I do need to work on that, but that's well within the middle of the property where I wouldn't need any kind of a variance from you guys at all.
So what she's saying, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Should we just?
Oh, no, we could close
The
it.
ARB will not give me anything without ZBA
Okay.
approval.
So I had been ill, so I was in the middle of the night watching the tape of you presenting this before, like yesterday.
Mhm.
And I had forgotten that you could build like a second story and all this kind of stuff, which was very convincing to me.
Mhm.
And then the neighbors' objections were about the zoning, not about this property, which I found annoying actually, because I thought that's not what we're doing here. We're not listening, it's not like the grievance. I think many of us feel that there's zoning that we don't love, but that's not our job.
Right.
So I'm perfectly happy to move ahead with this. Where's
Thank
Julia?
Luke,
Oh,
do you have
she's
any
off
comments?
the screen, okay.
We just.
Oh, I'm here.
Okay, good. How about
I'm
you?
here, I'm watching.
I'm good.
Honestly, I'm fine with this. I think it's a minimal ask to us.
Yeah, it's the most minimal thing I think we've ever been asked since I've been on the board, which is amazing.
It's a lot to say.
Well, is it?
Yeah,
Oh, well, we've been asked a lot of stuff.
yeah. Luke, do you have any
About something
questions or
else,
comments?
The castle was little too.
No, I mean, you know, the variances as they're written get pretty specific in
Mhm.
terms of the square footages.
Yeah. and
That, so what would happen if Lisa, in the process of just redesigning or, you know, new permutations,
Yeah,
if it becomes less of an ask, maybe it just keeps going, right?
right,
And we don't.
right.
But if it becomes even like a square foot more, does that mean she's going to have to come back here?
Exactly.
So,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
she's claiming that that's not the deal.
Yeah. But big,
Right, I
big
mean,
picture.
again, this
But she
area
doesn't need a
here.
variance there. She needs it here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm fine to close it.
Okay.
Yeah, Alex, just keep us posted if for some reason it changes and Lisa has to come back to us. But Lisa, we can close this for all purposes for now.
Okay, great.
So I'll motion to close for all purposes, close for decision, case number
Any neighbors or
3152.
anything?
Oh,
Those
do any
neighbors?
neighbor, is there anybody, Teshe? I don't see anybody, so I
It's
forget
just
that
sad.
there's, okay,
Cool.
we're good? Okay, so
Forge
we will,
ahead.
motion to close for decision, case number 3152, 125 Burnett Street. Can I have a second?
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, and we'll, motion to close the public hearing, Thursday, February 14th, 2023. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Tuesday.